The gleaming halls of Krellner Prime Station hummed with the subtle vibrations of countless species going about their business. To the untrained eye, it was a marvel of galactic cooperation, a physical manifestation of unity among the stars. To Dr. Eris Thorne, who had spent decades studying the subtle power dynamics of the Krellner Galactic Alliance, it was something else entirely, a beautiful prison of condescension and barely disguised contempt. Eris straightened his formal diplomatic attire, a blend of traditional Earth elements with concessions to galactic fashion that never quite looked natural on human frames. 300 years since humanity had joined the Alliance, and they were still treated as the curious novelty, the emotional curiosities who somehow managed to achieve spaceflight despite their obvious limitations. The Resource Allocation Summit was being held in the Grand Chamber, a vast hemispherical room where representatives from across the galaxy gathered beneath the artificial sky that mimicked the ancient homeworld of the Valkorians. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Everything on Krellner Prime whispered of Valkorian superiority. As Eris took his assigned seat, always positioned slightly lower than the Valkorian and Zythid delegations, he noted the usual pattern of interactions. Species greeted each other according to their place in the unspoken hierarchy. The Valkorians, tall and regal with their metallic-hued skin and elongated craniums housing their supposedly superior brains, barely acknowledged the lesser species. The Zythids, cool and calculating with their perfect geometric movements, exchanged data packets rather than emotional pleasantries. And then there were the humans, represented today by Eris and his small team, treated with the special brand of patronizing tolerance reserved for a precocious but ultimately insignificant child. Dr. Thorne, Governor Kale, that's of the Valkorian High Command, approached, his voice melodious yet somehow cutting. I trust Earth harvests have been bountiful. Your species' attachment to agriculture is quite quaint. Eris smiled diplomatically, ignoring the familiar sting. Quite bountiful, Governor. Our agricultural innovations have increased yields by 30% across 3 colony worlds. Impressive for your kind, Kale that said with a tight smile that didn't reach his iridescent eyes. Though one wonders why you insist on such hands-on approaches when automated systems have been standard for millennia. We find value in connection with our environments, Eris replied. It was an old dance. The pointed question, the measured response, the dismissal that would surely follow. Ah yes, your famous emotional attachments. Kale that's made a gesture that the Valkorians use to indicate amused tolerance. Well, we each have our evolutionary quirks to overcome. The subtle chuckles from nearby delegations weren't so subtle to Eris's ears. The summit began with the usual ceremonies, with elders from the founding species, Valkorians, Zythids, and the crystalline Quarti, speaking at length about unity and cooperation while the actual decisions had largely been made in closed sessions beforehand. When it came time for Earth's proposal, a modest request for additional development rights on the ocean moon Europa, Eris made his presentation with the careful precision that had become his trademark. He spoke of sustainable harvesting, minimal ecological impact, and the cultural significance of water worlds to human development. Governor Kaledatz's response was immediate and cutting. A charming proposal, but fundamentally flawed by the short-term thinking so endemic to ephemeral species, he said, using the Valkorian term for races with regrettably brief lifespans. The Europa development would yield results in what, 50 years? Hardly worth the resource allocation when we're planning the next 1,000-year cycle. Laughter rippled through the chamber, more open this time. Eris maintained his composure, decades of diplomatic training keeping his expression neutral while his mind cataloged each face, each laugh, each moment of humiliation. Not for vengeance, he told himself, but for understanding. Always for understanding. With respect, Governor, Eris countered, the proposed development would show measurable results within 15 years, with full maturation at 40. Well within the planning horizons established by the Council's own guidelines. Guidelines which are designed with certain accommodations for developing species. Kale that's replied with exaggerated patience. Perhaps we've coddled your kind too much, expecting Earth to function according to proper galactic timescales. More laughter, and the proposal was summarily tabled for further review, a diplomatic death sentence. Eris nodded in acknowledgement, his face a mask of practiced acceptance. Later, he received an urgent, encrypted message from Commander Lena Hansen, his contact in Earth's intelligence service. It was brief and direct. Closed session outcome concerning Kepler 186F. Urgent meeting required. Eyes only. After ensuring he wasn't followed, Eris made his way to a secure communication room in the human diplomatic quarter. The room was regularly swept for surveillance devices, one of the few places on Krellner Prime where humans could speak freely. Commander Hansen's holographic form materialized, her expression grim. They've authorized supervised scientific research on Kepler 186F, Eris. The vote was pushed through the High Council without proper human representation. Eris felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Kepler 186F was one of humanity's newest agricultural colonies, established just 30 years ago, home to nearly 2 million human settlers. What kind of research? Officially, they're claiming it's to study human adaptive capabilities in harsh environments. Unofficially, she transmitted a file. Our embedded intelligence caught this from the Valkorian military division. They're planning to test a new biological agent, supposedly to protect colonists from a potential pathogen. It's actually a controlled experiment on human immune responses. Eris stared at the data, his historian's mind immediately drawing parallels to the darkest chapters of human history. They're using our people as test subjects. Without consent. Yes. And the Council approved it with minimal oversight. The Valkorians will have operational control. The first research vessels depart in 3 weeks. Eris closed his eyes, feeling something shift within him. A fault line that had endured pressure for decades finally giving way. Do we have proof that's incontrovertible? Something that couldn't be explained away. Enough to convince our leadership, not enough to sway the Council. You know how they dismiss our evidence as emotionally tainted. I see. Eris's voice was quiet, almost calm. Commander, I believe it's time to activate the contingency we discussed after the Mars incident. Hansen's eyes widened slightly. Project Nightingale? Are you certain? I am. 300 years we've played by their rules. 3 centuries of mockery, marginalization, and now this. Treating our people like laboratory specimens. Eris looked directly into the holocron. Our patience has limits, Commander, and I've reached mine. I'll notify Earth Central immediately. For what it's worth, I agree. Hansen hesitated. This changes everything, Eris. Yes, he replied, feeling an odd sense of clarity. That's precisely the point. When Eris returned to Earth a week later, the wheels were already in motion. Within the heavily shielded underground facilities beneath the old Rocky Mountains, he met with the Shadow Council that had been preparing for this moment for nearly 50 years. General Eva Rostova, the stern military leader of Project Nightingale, greeted him in the central command room. Display screens showed scattered facilities across Earth's solar system and beyond, pulsing with activity reports. Dr. Thorne, she said, her voice carrying a Russian accent that had become a rarity in the homogenized culture of Earth. Your confirmation was the final authorization we needed. The project is now fully active. Eris nodded, taking a seat at the oval table where 12 other individuals, the best minds humanity had to offer, were already assembled. How long have we been preparing? Project Nightingale began unofficially after the first major diplomatic slight, the exclusion of Earth from the Proxima Treaty negotiations. That was in 2212. 68 years ago, we formalized the structure after the Mars incident. Rostova's expression was grim. We've maintained absolute secrecy, using the Valkorians' own contempt as our shield. They monitor our official research, our public communications, but they've never bothered to look deeper. Why would they? We're just simple, emotional humans. And our capabilities now. Dr. Lena Hansen, the brilliant quantum physicist who had been the one to alert him about Kepler 186F, brought up a holographic display. We have 6 major breakthrough technologies that have been developed completely outside Alliance oversight. The hologram showed schematics Eris could barely comprehend. Emotion-adaptive AI systems that can outthink traditional logic-based systems by introducing controlled chaos elements. Nanobiological defenses modeled on human immune responses. Ironic given what they planned for Kepler. Quantum communication that bypasses traditional monitoring. And this. The hologram changed to show what looked like a simple silver sphere. The Valkyrians believe our weapons technology is at least a century behind theirs, Hansen explained. This device proves otherwise. It generates a contained disruption field that temporarily disables any technology based on crystal matrix computing, which happens to be the foundation of all Valkyrian and Scythid systems. We call it Pandora, Rostova added. For obvious reasons, there were murmurs around the table. Not everyone was comfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Ambassador Liu Wei, the eldest member of the council, voiced his concerns. Are we truly prepared to risk everything we've built? The Valkyrians are arrogant, yes, but they command the most powerful fleet in the Alliance. If we reveal our hand and fail, then we'll face the same fate we're already heading toward, Eris replied quietly. Slow extinction through marginalization or exploitation as laboratory subjects. Tell me, Ambassador, how long does a species survive as a curiosity in a zoo? The room fell silent. I've spent my life studying patterns of rise and fall, of colonization and resistance, Eris continued. In every case, there comes a moment when accommodation becomes surrender. We've reached that point. Rostova nodded. The Valkyrian fleet heading to Kepler. 186F gives us our opportunity. They've planned their tests on our people. Let them become the test subjects instead. Over the next week, resources were mobilized across Earth's hidden network. Ostensibly civilian ships carried concealed technology to key positions. Through the quantum communication network, colonies were discreetly prepared. On Kepler, 186F itself, specially trained operatives began installing weather modification systems disguised as agricultural equipment. Not everyone on Earth agreed with the plan. Protests erupted when certain resources were diverted, though the protesters didn't know the real reason. Eris found himself addressing a tense meeting of the Earth Unified Council, facing opposition from those who still believed in diplomatic solutions. You're risking everything on a desperate gamble, said Councillor Patel, his voice sharp with frustration. 3 centuries of carefully built relationships, thrown away on what? Pride. Not pride, Eris replied calmly. Survival. The relationships you value so highly are built on a foundation of contempt. I've spent my entire career trying to change that through dialogue, through cultural exchange, through every peaceful means imaginable. And where has it gotten us? They're about to use our colonists as laboratory rats. So we protest through diplomatic channels. We gather evidence, build alliances with other marginalized species. We've tried that, Rostova cut in. After the Mars incident, after the Titan mining rights were revoked, after the Alpha Centauri exclusion. Each time, we were patted on the head and told to accept the greater wisdom of the elder races. Each time, we retreated, hoping for gradual improvement. And each time, the noose tightened. The debate raged for hours, but in the end, the evidence of the Valkyrian plans for Kepler 186F proved decisive. The Council voted 7-3 to proceed with Project Nightingale, with 2 abstentions. As they left the chamber, Liu Wei fell in a step beside Eris. I voted for your plan, the old diplomat said quietly, but I fear what we may become in the process of fighting monsters. Eris nodded solemnly. As do I, Ambassador. But I fear even more what will happen if we don't fight at all. 3 weeks later, the Valkyrian scientific expedition approached Kepler 186F. Their fleet was impressive. 5 major vessels and numerous support craft, far more than needed for legitimate research. The firepower alone betrayed their true intentions. Eris watched from a secure command center as the human colonists on Kepler 186F went about their business, unaware they were about to become the flashpoint for a galactic power shift. Most were simple farmers and engineers, families building new lives on the frontier. "All systems in place?" he asked quietly. Hansen nodded, her fingers dancing over control surfaces. "Weather modification network is active but dormant. Nanoviral countermeasures are distributed throughout the colony's water supply, harmless to humans, but they'll neutralize anything the Valkorians try to introduce. And our special package is ready." The special package was a tailored computer virus unlike anything the Alliance had ever encountered. While Valkorian systems were designed to resist traditional attacks, they had never been designed to counter something modeled on human immune systems, adaptable, seemingly chaotic, yet precisely targeted. "Remember," Eris said to the team, "this is not about revenge. It's about demonstrating capability and forcing recognition. Minimal casualties." As the Valkorian fleet established orbit around Kepler 186F, they broadcast the expected diplomatic pleasantries about scientific cooperation and health monitoring. The colony's official governor responded with the appropriate gratitude. Behind the scenes, however, Project Nightingale made its first move. The moment the Valkorians launched their first research probe, actually, carrying the biological agent they intended to test, the weather modification system activated. Targeted atmospheric disturbances created impossible downdrafts and electrical storms precisely in the probe's flight path. At the same time, the computer virus was transmitted to the fleet's command systems through their own communication beam. On the Valkorian ships, confusion reigned as systems began failing in patterns that defied logic. Communication arrays redirected signals to nonsensical destinations. Environmental controls fluctuated randomly. And most alarmingly, weapons systems reported phantom targets, causing automated defenses to fire at nothing. "They're trying to reboot their primary systems," Hansen reported, monitoring the chaos. "But the virus is learning faster than their countermeasures." The Valkorian commander, a veteran who had never faced serious opposition from lesser species, ordered an emergency deployment of shuttles to continue the mission. As they descended toward the planet's surface, the weather modification system intensified, creating localized atmospheric conditions that made landing impossible. After 4 failed attempts and the loss of 2 shuttles to the storms, crews safely ejected, the Valkorian fleet had no choice but to withdraw to a higher orbit to assess the situation. "They're sending emergency communications to Krellner Prime," Hansen reported, claiming unexplained interference and requesting guidance. Eris nodded. "Now for Phase 2. Let's make sure the right information reaches the right parties." While the Valkorians struggled to understand what was happening, Earth's intelligence network discreetly transmitted selected data about the biological agent the Valkorians had attempted to deploy to several neutral species within the Alliance, including evidence that it had been designed specifically to test human immune responses without consent. The reaction was immediate. The Athosians, a fungal collective intelligence with strict bioethical principles, issued a formal demand for investigation. The mercantile Brakari, always looking for leverage against the Valkorians, amplified the concerns. Even the Core T, usually aligned with the older powers, expressed crystallized disquiet at the potential treaty violations. Meanwhile, Eris prepared a masterful diplomatic move. Earth's official channels expressed deep concern over the difficulties faced by the Valkorian expedition and offered technical assistance to resolve the natural anomalies affecting Kepler 186F. It was a breathtaking display of innocence wrapped around an unmistakable message. "We know what you were trying to do. We stopped you, and we want you to know it was us." The Valkorian High Command, unaccustomed to being outmaneuvered by humans, responded with fury. Economic sanctions were immediately imposed on Earth and its colonies. Travel restrictions were enacted. Governor Kale that's himself issued a statement condemning Earth's interference with legitimate scientific research and demanding a full investigation into illegal technological development. "They've taken the bait," Rostova observed as the sanctions were announced. Now, they'll try to make an example of us through economic pressure and isolation, which gives us the perfect cover to complete our preparations, Eris agreed. Over the next 3 weeks, as economic conditions on Earth and its colonies began to deteriorate under the sanctions, Project Nightingale accelerated its final phase. The appearance of hardship concealed the strategic redeployment of resources. Manufacturing facilities that had officially closed due to material shortages were actually running at triple capacity, producing components for the defensive grid. Civilian ships grounded by fuel rationing were being secretly retrofitted with the new technologies. Throughout human space, the message spread through secure channels. Prepare. Be ready. The moment approaches. The propaganda from Krellner Prime intensified, portraying humans as ungrateful, technologically backward rebels who had somehow stumbled onto a few tricks but would soon be brought back into line. The mockery that had once been subtle became overt, with Valkorian commentators openly discussing the emotional instability of humans and suggesting increased oversight of all human worlds for their own protection. What the Valkorians couldn't see, blinded by their own superiority complex, was how their actions were unifying humanity as never before. Ancient rivalries and factional disputes faded in the face of existential threat. Even those who had opposed Project Nightingale initially now recognized the need for a decisive response. After a month of escalating tensions, Governor Kale that's announced that a peacekeeping armada would be dispatched to Earth to restore proper oversight and investigate illegal weapons development. The fleet he assembled was overwhelming, 50 capital ships, and hundreds of support vessels, the largest military force the Alliance had deployed in a century. "This is it," Eris told the Project Nightingale leadership as they gathered in the command center. "They expect us to capitulate at the mere sight of their armada. When we don't, they'll attempt to make an example of us with a limited demonstration of force. That's our window." As the Valkorian armada approached Earth, an emergency session of the Galactic Council was convened on Krellner Prime. Eris attended as Earth's representative, a lone figure facing the assembled might of the elder races. Governor Kale that didn't bother with diplomatic niceties. Earth has violated numerous treaty provisions through unauthorized technological development, interference with legitimate scientific research, and now apparent preparation for military action. We demand immediate submission to Alliance authority, full disarmament, and acceptance of direct oversight by Valkorian administrators. Eris stood, his expression calm despite the hostility directed at him from across the chamber. Humanity respectfully declines. A murmur of shock rippled through the assembly. No minor species had ever directly refused a Valkorian ultimatum. "Perhaps you misunderstand the gravity of your situation," Kale that's continued, his tone shifting to one of exaggerated patience. "The fleet currently approaching your homeworld is capable of reducing your cities to ash. Your defiance is both futile and irrational, though I suppose we should expect no less from such an emotionally driven species." "We understand perfectly," Eris replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "For 3 centuries, we have endured your contempt. We have watched you dismiss our achievements, mock our biology, appropriate our resources, and now attempt to use our people as unwilling test subjects for your biological weapons. Our patience was mistaken for weakness. That was your error, not ours." The Valkorian governor's face darkened with anger. "You dare accuse. We have distributed the evidence of your planned experiments on Kepler 186F to every member of the Alliance," Eris continued calmly. "But that is merely one example of a pattern spanning centuries. Today, that pattern ends." He turned to address the entire council. "Humanity does not seek domination or revenge. We seek only the respect and self-determination that should be the right of all sentient beings. We have extended our hand in friendship countless times, only to be treated as amusing children at best and experimental subjects at worst. No more." As Eris spoke, the Valkorian armada entered Earth's solar system. They expected minimal resistance, perhaps a few outdated defense platforms, easily overwhelmed. What they encountered instead was beyond their comprehension. A network of previously undetected satellites activated, creating a defensive grid unlike anything in Alliance records. Swarms of microscopically small drones, invisible to standard sensors, surrounded their ships. And at key strategic points throughout the system, human vessels waited. Not the primitive craft the Valkorians expected, but ships incorporating technologies that should have been centuries beyond human development. Admiral Sortek, commanding the Valkorian armada, was not easily intimidated. Despite the unexpected defenses, he ordered the fleet to proceed toward Earth. They would teach these upstart humans a lesson they would never forget. On Krellner Prime, Kael'Thas received the Admiral's report and smiled coldly at Eris. Your tricks and toys are impressive, Dr. Thorne, but they will not save you. Admiral Sortek has begun his approach. I suggest you transmit your surrender immediately to spare your people unnecessary suffering. Eris said nothing, his gaze steady. In Earth's solar system, Admiral Sortek ordered a demonstration strike, a precision attack on a small lunar defense platform, intended to show the humans just how outmatched they truly were. The shot was fired and missed. The beam of concentrated energy that should have obliterated the platform was deflected by a field that shouldn't have existed. Before the Admiral could order a second attempt, the first wave of the human counterattack began. The virus that had disabled the expedition at Kepler 186F had been refined and enhanced. It slipped through the Valkorian fleet's communication systems like water through sand, adapting to countermeasures before they could be fully implemented. Ship after ship reported critical system failures. Weapons went offline. Navigation systems showed impossible readings. Still, the Valkorians had numbers and reinforced backup systems. Admiral Sortek ordered the fleet to continue on conventional controls if necessary. They would not be humiliated by a lesser species. That's when the second phase of Earth's defense activated. The defensive grid generated interference patterns that disrupted the crystalline computing cores at the heart of Valkorian technology. Not enough to shut them down completely. That would come later, but enough to create cascading errors that made coordinated action impossible. On Krellner Prime, the council chamber had become a scene of chaos as reports flooded in. The unthinkable was happening. The mighty Valkorian armada was being systematically neutralized by human defenses, not through superior firepower, but through unprecedented technological innovation that targeted the very foundations of Valkorian military technology. Kael'Thas's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "What have you done?" he demanded of Eris. "This is impossible. Your species couldn't have developed such technology without." He stopped suddenly, realization dawning. "You've been deceiving us. All this time." "We learn from the best," Eris replied quietly. "You taught us the value of patience and misdirection. For generations, you saw exactly what you expected to see: simple, emotional humans struggling to keep up with your superior civilization. Your contempt was our greatest asset." The final act of Earth's defense began. A specialized team of human operatives, using personal stealth technology that rendered them effectively invisible to Valkorian sensors, boarded Admiral Sortek's flagship. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, disabling security systems and avoiding confrontation where possible. Their target was not the Admiral himself, but the ship's primary communication array, the most powerful in the fleet, capable of transmitting directly to Krellner Prime through subspace channels. When they reached it, they didn't destroy it. Instead, they reconfigured it to broadcast a very specific message. On Krellner Prime, in the council chamber and across the station, every communication device suddenly activated. The face of Dr. Eris Thorne appeared, not the diplomat standing in the chamber, but a simultaneous broadcast from Earth. This was the true masterstroke of Project Nightingale, a demonstration that humans could commandeer even the most secure Valkorian systems. "People of the Krellner Alliance," the broadcast began, "this message comes not as a declaration of war, but as a statement of truth. For too long, The elder races have maintained a system of hierarchy and exploitation, disguised as benevolent guidance. Today, that system faces a choice: evolve or collapse. The broadcast continued, displaying evidence of centuries of manipulation, resource appropriation, and the systematic marginalization of newer species. Not just humans, but dozens of others. It showed the planned biological experiments on Kepler 186f in detail, alongside other atrocities committed under the guise of scientific research or necessary security measures. Humanity does not seek domination. Eris's broadcast continued. We seek partnership based on mutual respect. We have disabled, not destroyed, the fleet sent to subjugate us. We have exposed, not overthrown, the power structures that have constrained so many for so long. What happens next is a choice that belongs to all members of the Alliance, not just the self-proclaimed elite. In the council chamber, Kael'thas lunged for Eris in blind fury, but was restrained by his own security detail, Valkorians who had seen the evidence and were suddenly uncertain of their loyalties. "This is sedition," Kael'thas shouted. "Technological terrorism. The Valkorian Empire will reduce your world to ash for this outrage." Eris looked at him calmly. "The Valkorian Empire is no more, Governor. Look around you." Throughout the chamber, representatives of dozens of species were communicating urgently with their homeworlds. The Athosians had already publicly withdrawn from Valkorian treaties. The Brakari were offering sanctuary to any species seeking protection from unjust reprisal. Even the Xythids, traditional allies of the Valkorians, were noticeably silent, their logical minds calculating new probabilities. The Krellner Alliance, or at least its existing power structure, was collapsing before their eyes. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy underwent a fundamental realignment. The Valkorian Armada was allowed to return home, but significantly disarmed. Governor Kael'thas was removed from power by his own government, which was desperate to adapt to the new reality. Earth led the formation of a coalition of previously marginalized species, united not by conquest, but by shared principles of autonomy and mutual respect. They called it the Concordat of Equals, a pointed contrast to the hierarchical alliance. The transition was not without violence. Hardliners among the Valkorians attempted a military response, only to discover that their technology was now vulnerable in ways they had never imagined. The Xythids, after careful calculation, chose to align with the emerging Concordat, recognizing that adaptation was the logical choice. 6 months after the confrontation at Earth, a new galactic treaty was signed on neutral territory, a water world called Oceanus that held cultural significance for several species. The treaty formally dissolved the old power structures of the Krellner Alliance and established a framework for genuine cooperation among all sentient species. Eris Thorn, who had become a legendary figure across human space, chose not to take a leadership role in the new order. Instead, he returned to his first love, history. He established a galactic historical institute dedicated to documenting the true stories of all species, ensuring that the patterns of the past would not be forgotten or repeated. In his private quarters on Earth, Eris kept a small display case containing a single item, a Valkorian ceremonial dagger that Governor Kael'thas had once mockingly presented to him as a primitive artifact suitable for human appreciation. Now it served as a reminder of arrogance, of patience, and of the dangers of underestimating those you consider beneath you. Humans were no longer mocked in galactic society. Their emotional depth, once derided, was now recognized as a source of creativity and resilience. Their technological innovations, once hidden, now formed the foundation for advancements benefiting countless species. Their relatively short lifespans, once a subject of condescension, were acknowledged as a driver of their adaptability and urgency. Most importantly, the concept of lesser and greater species began to fade, replaced by an appreciation for the unique contributions each civilization could offer to the galactic community. Peace was fragile, and the Valkorians, though diminished, remained a potential threat. The ancient prejudices would not disappear overnight. But for the first time in centuries, there was a genuine foundation for progress. In his final public address before retiring to his academic pursuits, Eris offered a reflection that would be remembered across human space for generations to come. Patience is a virtue only when it serves justice. When patience becomes complicity with oppression, it transforms into a chain that binds rather than a bridge that connects. Humanity's greatest strength was not in our technology or our strategy, but in recognizing when our patience had served its purpose, and when the time had come to transform centuries of silent endurance into the catalyst for change. The Valkorians had mocked humans for centuries, dismissing their emotions, their adaptability, their very nature as weaknesses. They had never imagined that these supposed weaknesses would become the foundations of a revolution that would reshape the galaxy. They never considered that human patience might have limits. That was their final and greatest mistake.